Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. So this talk is Achieving Hyperproductivity with Cloud-Native Serverless Architecture. So we're with a company called Vastly, formerly company.com. And we'll talk today about a bunch of the things that kind of make what we've learned distinct, and some of the things from an architecture perspective that we've learned over the course of building several different platforms. And then we'll talk specifically about a use case today, that we've been able to accomplish in the last few months that will kind of illustrate well why we've picked the types of technology that we have. So a little bit about myself. I'm the CTO of Vastly. I've been a technologist for 25 plus years, program in multiple different languages, and also I'm a CX advisor, meaning I work with a lot of other Fortune 500 companies that build platforms as well, and have been a platform builder a lot of my career. And Aiden?
Yeah, so on my end, I'm the founder of Swiftwise AI, and on my day job, I'm a Java consultant. I kind of come from both worlds. A lot of JavaScript and TypeScript on the day in, and Java pretty much on the rest of the time. So, yeah.
Great. All right, so we'll dive in. So first off, bună ziua. So for everybody, we are very new to Romania, and so we came here for several different things. One, to really get engaged with the community, learn about the people, learn about the technical community here. And so far, I mean, everybody has been amazing. It's great to be at a conference here and see what people are doing. A long journey to get here, obviously. Coming from Los Angeles, we're both from California. We have quite a few teams in the United States, in Austin, in LA, and then we're pretty distributed. So we spent the last week or so in Cluj, meeting the community, spending time here, being a little bit of tourist. We'll take the night train toward the end of the week, and we'll spend the following week in Bucharest. So kind of a long trip, but good to meet the community. So we'll dive in technically a little bit, but this talk is for y'all. So. Really, the label of the talk, if you looked into what we mentioned, it's how a small team was able to deliver some pretty amazing accomplishments within about a month. And all of us as engineers and technologists, we're presented often with really crazy deadlines, or things where we're pushing, wanting to do the right thing, wanting to pick the right technologies to solve for a customer, but customer constraints and other things like that. Will push us to, the edge of what we, feel like is really doable. So we'll talk a little bit today about how we've, built some things that help accelerate teams, and how, the hope would be that we can inspire you to kind of look again at the things that you do and the things that you build with, and how to accelerate some of those yourselves. And so, raise the hands, like how many engineers in the room? Great. Anybody product management or UX or anything like that? Just to know the crowd? No, so mostly engineers, great. Then we'll be able to get pretty technical, which is awesome. So quick outline, we're going to talk about the future of modern software development. And this is, obviously the lens of, just a couple of us, but to share what we've been seeing, other folks do, other enterprises start to adopt. We're going to talk about, what we've seen as the winners and the losers in the market and why. We'll talk about why production code is hard and the types of things that you've probably all ran into. We're going to paint a picture of what we feel like is the promised land, which again, it's our experience, but it's being able to, pick the right technologies that solve things that allow you to go fast. We are also going to paint the picture of what got you here, like the things that may not be the things that take you there, and that's we've started to learn that lesson ourselves. We'll give you a project use case. We're going to talk about a couple of technologies in depth. We think you'll find that interesting. And then we'll leave you with a couple of outcomes and kind of key takeaways that we've realized as we've been engineering, and maybe things that will be relevant to you as well. So I love this quote. So the future's already here. It's just not very evenly distributed, right? We've got generative AI. We've got platform building. We've got serverless architecture. Things are exploding in the technology world right now, and it's just been a hockey stick of innovation, probably over the last, 2 years for sure. But yeah, within this last year, it's just been ridiculous. And when you look at what companies are doing from an enterprise perspective, Gartner, Forrester, Deloitte, they help you really understand, what the winners and the losers are doing. And there's a clear differentiation between the folks that are really able to leverage modern technology, that are able to, really lean into things like a product-centric organization or design-led organizations. And it also paints a pretty big picture that for all of us, there's still a huge amount of tech jobs in these areas that are really, really kind of niche, that the companies just have not been able to find people to fill, roles like ours, like engineering roles, like product roles, like user experience roles. And when we really contemplate the companies that have done really well versus the ones that don't, there's three key differentiators that we find that stand out. The ones that have leveraged modern product development, on average, you experience 70% faster time, to value, and 85%, reduced cost, and then risk, 50% reduced risk. And those are all the key tenets of why you would look to do, things like leverage repeatable platforms, pick technology that doesn't require as much, management and maintenance. So why is production, code hard, right? I mentioned a couple of roles looking for hands, in the audience. When you sit down to, create an enterprise product, you need product management. You need user experience professionals. You need full stack engineering where integrations are really challenging and difficult. You need guys like me that are enterprise architects that can really look and help a, organization understand, what they need to do, from an architecture perspective to allow things to scale. And then, just thinking about hosting and, DevSecOps. So, the security end of operations as well as people to actually, maintain the product. And really, when you think about what most organizations really care about, it's a solution, right? So all the challenges, all the things that we struggle with and, are very concerned about, really at the end of the day, the customer just wants a solution to their problem. So really, as we started sitting down thinking about the platforms that we built over the last few years, the thing was, what if we could only focus on, delivering the solution? What if we could build beautiful UX, UI, and again, with a small team? What if we could, use the latest, most modern frameworks and build enterprise-grade software without, just implicitly by using the tools that we built from a platform perspective? To us, that's the promised land, right? A handful of people that are able to actually just sit down, think about a customer issue, and bring to bear, tools that, that they can really solve a problem without thinking about it. Oops, sorry. And so we're going to talk about our journey, like, our prior platform, and really, a little bit of Vastly and Company.com's journey and, what we've experienced over the last few years. And, the big tenet, for us was what got us here isn't necessarily going to be the thing that to take us into the future. So when we think about our prior tech stack, we had really solved for things like multi-tenancy and this concept of, data-driven architecture. And, when we started to get customers that really, had a lot more bespoke or individual things that they cared about, we found ourselves, making huge customizations to code bases that were never intended to be customized, right? And that's problematic for a few reasons. If you have customers that are bringing, really specific or have very specific needs, and you're, actually building a platform that is meant to be more general in nature, every customization that you do to that project, if it's not good, for somebody else, then you're basically, slowing down engineering on that platform by implementing it, right? So not only did it not help us go faster, but it slowed us down in the long run. So what we had a marketplace platform or a digital experience platform that really, like I mentioned, was sort of configured for this multi-tenancy concept where, we could have multiple clients in a single, platform. It supported all kinds of amazing things like event-driven architecture, serverless capability. We had a really modern front end. But again, it was basically, really more configured for this like fixed and flexible environment. And, it's a little bit like Salesforce.com, where if you're going to integrate with something like that, the less you actually have to customize it, the better the ROI, the better the time. And so what we realized is what we needed additionally was this concept of being able to move, from fixed and flex to, really flex and freedom. And really what those custom, solutions needed was this ability, not to have multi-tenancy, but more tenant isolation, or the ability to, have a customer kind of living in their own, tenant and abstract from everybody else. And so, like I mentioned, we had some really modern architecture. So it's not like we had bad technology. We had code generators and CLIs to help increase the engineers' time to be able to generate a lot of scaffold code. We were building function as a service micro applications. We had event-driven architecture. We had a design system that was actually really modern using React. We even had GraphQL, which is a backend for a front-end technology that allowed our engineers to essentially orchestrate all these front-end components in a really straightforward way. So we had a lot of modern things that we could build upon. So earlier this year, as we started contemplating, what do we really need? To be able to support some of these clients that required like extreme, kind of customization, we realized we needed a new approach, right? What got us here wasn't going to get us there. And just as a little bit of a refresher, what we talked about, what we've learned is, about the people that are really winning, is that it's faster time to value. It's a reduced cost. It's a reduced risk. That's what people really care about. It's the solution. And so as we started contemplating, how do we get there? What's our strategy to actually moving forward, to being able to win, to be able to build a platform, that was going to be our future platform. And so, a big thing was about creating accelerators, looking at patterns that y'all would use from an engineering perspective, looking for systems that you're going to leverage, enabling repeatability, over the things that you do day in and day out, and then looking for areas in every part of your business to reduce cognitive drag, right? And I think the last thing, and maybe the most important one, was this concept of a beginner's mindset. So the ability to leverage technical innovation, to throw away things that maybe you feel like inside and out because you've coded with it your entire career. So that was a big one. So as we really thought about what that strategy looked like, we evolved into this, a second platform, essentially, an additional thing outside of this multi-tenant platform to a product that we now call Wave. We're going to talk a little bit in the context of what Wave is, but really just to talk about the types of software that you all could leverage on your own to do something similar, right? But we'll talk about it in the context of what we did with Wave, and I think hopefully you'll pick something up from that. So Wave was our investment in a platform that allowed our engineers to go fast, right? And we considered Wave, the modern evolution of what a lot of people would consider LCAP. It's a little bit of a dirty word, right? Because we're all engineers. Nobody wants really low to no code. But what we do want are accelerators and repeatability. So when we talk like LCAP, just keep that in mind. It's, our concept of LCAP is a little bit more around, just things that help us as engineers go fast. And also, because we are a SOLAS company, when you couple, that sort of, platform and technology along with things like people and process, meaning, great product management, user experience folks, it really ends up being a differentiator. So hopefully this is an interesting slide. This lays out a little bit of, our core architecture around Wave. So we break it up into 3 different areas, this onboarding and setup concept. When we think about bringing, engineers onto a new project, there's always the work that you have to do up front to, build out your component libraries, to, put together a design system. There's, all kinds of starter templates and things that as engineers we're kind of having to set up. And then from a build perspective, the core of that is a mono-repo, right? So at the end of the day, our mono-repos give us the ability to build web apps, microservices, tie all that together with GraphQL and an event-driven architecture. In strong types that then you're able to leverage across the platform. And then finally, the last tenet would be deploy and monitor. So now that you've started to build all these things and you've got hundreds of potentially function as a service services, well, how do you have the monitoring and telemetry and all that to be able to really get visibility into where issues or bottlenecks or things like that happen within the platform, right? And then finally, delivery pipelines with things like CI/CD and everything that you need from a DevOps perspective. So this is how we thought about it. And really, I'll fly through these slides because it'll be a little bit more interesting to see as we get into the technology that's behind the scenes in some of this. But for onboarding, it was things like allowing our creators or our engineers to have passwordless login, right, from terminal, right, so that they could, log in and get access at the highest level, to an org on AWS and have access to all the different workload accounts that they need access to work on a project, right? We talked about tenant isolation a bit, so I won't go there. Mono-repo architecture setup. Mono-repos are great, but there's, obviously a lot of setup and things that are involved in that as an engineer that's getting going on a platform. So, and then build, publish. We'll get into much more detail on this, but we're a JavaScript shop, so at the end of the day, NextJS has been a great tool there, and we've got all kinds of generators and apps and components that as we start to think about, again, as an engineer is going about their job, what are the types of things that would really be helpful for them? How do they build and test in isolation using things like Storybook for their front ends? And on the back end, generators as well, being able to do things like build microservices, having model-first concepts that can actually drive strong types, and then leveraging tools like Prisma or ORM so that they can, again, create types that are kind of more data-driven. And then, bundling it all up with utilities and things like that to allow you to bundle and publish and, do package management and all the basic stuff that, you all know as you start to set up a project can, really become a bear. And last thing, we touched a bit on, deploy and monitor, just some high-level things with, Husky pre-commits and stuff like that, approval processes, GitHub Actions workflow. We are doing some things with, AI-generated code review and pull requests, which is really pretty interesting. And then the ability to do things like tail your logs directly from your CLI. And, like I mentioned, get introspection with things like Sentry to, how your microservices are performing, how your front end is working. So that's just the shell and, kind of a high level about, our Wave platform and the types of things that we've started to put together. So going fast. So to kind of make this real, we're going to talk a little bit about a client project that we recently worked on. And we'll get into a little bit of the project brief so you can get an idea of what the project was. We'll talk about the timeline. We'll talk about some of the technologies that we picked for the blueprint for this client. So the client is a large US-based magazine advertiser, so print advertiser. I think they've done something like 1 billion all-time mailings as long as they've been in distribution. And that amounts to like millions of magazines a month. But the kind of interesting thing is these guys had no digital presence like whatsoever. A website or something like that was about it. But with 70 distinct markets, a franchise model, the whole thing, they had no technology backing it. So there were 2 core things that we ended up needing to build. One was an advertiser directory. And the second was this really novel generative AI experience that Aiden will be able to talk a little bit about. But the idea was an AI avatar that essentially was able to look into, advertisers for a given geo, and based on some really vague requirement, I want to make my backyard, more interesting. I want to, I want to increase my curb appeal. I want to do, really basic things like that. The AI avatar is able to go out, use OpenAI or some other LLM behind the scenes, look at a series of advertisers in a database and return them based on preference, and then talk about them in a way that made the customers of the site, feel like they were speaking with an individual. So it was a pretty interesting project. So now, if we think about timeline, I think we made the statement that it was about a month worth of engineering on it, and that's truly what it ended up being. When I go back to people, process, tools, and technology, you think about the types of things that made it successful outside of the engineering. So we started the project in July of this year, and it was a lot of product management, UX folks really understanding the customer problem. So we spent probably a month to a month and a half or more doing things like interviewing advertisers, interviewing the staff at the magazine, really starting to then do user testing and things against potential user interfaces that we were going to launch, and then. Really, that left us a pretty short amount of time once we needed to get into the engineering, and you can probably all relate. That's what ends up happening. But we spent about a month through September to they're actually launching just now, doing engineering. And I think the only way we were able to make that happen is by really being thoughtful about the technology that we brought together to bring it to bear. So So we'll talk about that. So, technical considerations, and, you can potentially relate this back to your own projects. It's a greenfield app, right? So we were building, at least one to start. They had a roadmap of other things that they were, thinking about or intending to launch in succession behind it. Data is relational, highly relational. So that starts to push us away from things like we would normally have done, with DynamoDB or, other sorts of AWS-related, data sources. So, candidly, we're very serverless in nature. So we were thinking, to be using, some of the different Aurora serverless, solutions and stuff. And so we'll talk about, how that went. And then they've got potentially millions of users across, the month engaging, month over month. And really the team that was going to do the work on our side was probably 3 or 4 people in total. And then I guess lastly, we have this giant need for generative AI and really no specialization in that, like whatsoever. So we had the decks a bit stacked against us. So if I think, as we started to, you can keep the backdrop of the last slide in your head, like I talked about. When we're building a technical blueprint for this, it's like, okay, we know we're going to go with a mono-repo. A mono-repo is going to allow us to launch these different apps and microservices pretty quickly. We know NextJS is a React platform that we've used that our design system can leverage. It'll allow us to do things like server-side rendering. We can generate strong types off of this software that we've used called Prisma. That's an ORM. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we want to be able to use a backend as a front end with GraphQL, which Prisma AppSync, we actually ended up spending time with the founder, and he worked with us in this project as a consultant, which is really nice. And then at the end of the day, using function as service resolvers with Lambda functions, it ended up being a really pretty nice thing. But we'll talk about what, by using things like function as a server resolver, having a database connection can be a bit problematic. And so we'll talk about how PlanetScale was able to help us solve that as well. So mono-repos. Anybody familiar with mono-repos? Used them at all here? Show of hands. No? Okay. So mono-repos are a little bit divisive. It'd be interesting to hear if you haven't used them, any strong opinions about them. Yeah, I think some people love them, some people hate them. They've been really popularized by FANG over the years. So Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix. A lot of those guys have been using mono-repos for years. And I think a lot of people probably started using mono-repos based on FANG. And for a while there, you'd hear horror stories about people ending up in problematic things. And why? Because we're not Facebook, Apple, Netflix, or Google, right? We're all probably part of smaller companies that needs are different and that teams are different. So we've, as we started to kind of think about mono-repos and the benefit versus negatives, there's a company called Turbo-Repo that's been out there that's really started to make it, better. Companies like React, Jest, PNPM, Next itself have all started to leverage mono-repos. And they do it in a way that makes it a lot more straightforward for people like us that have, more, different needs, I guess, than like a large FANG. But the big benefits in my mind are, you've got code sharing, which reduces cognitive drag. It's fast. If you look at even what I've got on the screen, when you're bundling and building multiple different projects and microservices, a lot of those things can take minutes to build locally, which is horrible. And so Turbo-Repo does a great job of actually only building things as they need to be built and then caching them, which is pretty amazing. And it allows you to do deployments and things like that individually. So even though it is a single repo, it gives you the fidelity to do individual deployments. So mono-repos, we're a fan. So next.
Yeah, so the next really big technical consideration was around front-end framework. So if any of you are familiar with TypeScript, JavaScript, show of hands, anybody here? Nice. Okay, cool. So that's coming from that perspective, right? Mono-repos start to make a lot of sense. And from a front-end framework, there are 2 big obvious choices, right? So our personal tech stack is React, and with that comes something like NextJS. So with NextJS, one of the big things there is server-side rendering. So cutting down bundling sizes, being able to deploy things incredibly quickly and share components in an efficient manner. One of the big things that sets NextJS aside from other frameworks is the developer experience focus, right? So within your page structure and with your component sharing, it allows things to be completely modular, which really fits into the inherent way that TypeScript works as a language. in the inherent way that Mono-Repos work as a structure.
All right, and then, I'd mentioned we had made investments in a design system. I'd highly recommend looking at some things like Chakra UI or other ones that are out there if you're engineering at all on React. By leveraging a design system, if you've got UX folks and product managers that are really spending time to understand customer problems, one of the biggest customer problems that you're going to run into is lack of consistency, right? And as an engineer, when you go to work on some bespoke or distinct thing, the more you can leverage that repeatability, the faster you go, the more consistent your screens can be, the more consistent the user experience is. So we've made pretty heavy investments in, like I mentioned, things like Chakra. We're actually looking at another library now to continue to extend that out. And then by leveraging that, with something called React or React Storybook, you're able to develop components and test in isolation. So we ended up extending Chakra to build our own components. You can see one, at the bottom here. It's this labeled stepper thing that allows you then to test things in isolation, and it's a huge lift. So I talked a little bit about Prisma as well, and again, Prisma is a bit of a divisive technology as well, and primarily because I think a lot of people have gotten into it without really thoroughly understanding it to begin with, to be honest. But really what Prisma is an ORM. And any ORM, when you think about the ones there's probably a lot of love and hate for ORMs for a lot of reasons. ORMs work great until they don't, I guess is the best way to think about that. But Prisma so far for us has been awesome. Yeah, it's got a really good DSL and great abstractions on top of the data. As you've generated data and created schema, then those schemas we're able to then leverage again on the front end within our GraphQL. So things like that are pretty amazing. And if you can get away with it with a greenfield app, I highly recommend it. Why you wouldn't want to use it? If you've got a large, existing database, or you've got a lot of use cases that you rely on the database to optimize for you. So queries, functions, views, things like that you're getting that much more, capability, out of it being optimized there, then, maybe not such a great fit, right? But if you can get away without that, it's pretty awesome. And then I mentioned Prisma AppSync. So Prisma AppSync is a technology that you can use in relation with Prisma. Basically, it will take the schema that gets generated by Prisma itself and create all of your queries, mutations, subscriptions on the fly. So pretty incredible. And from that standpoint, we could actually show a demo. You're able to stand up a local host GraphQL server that runs, right on your kind of developer environment. That then, using things like GQL, you can secure routes, you can add hooks, you can add custom resolvers. It supports things like Cognito and Cognito identity pools and groups. So pretty amazing. And then they have a lot of things out of the box like XSS prevention, DOS prevention, rate limiting. So I can't say enough about these guys. Pretty amazing. And when you couple that with something like a Prisma, you've got an end-to-end, generate your schema. Once your schema is generated, now you can generate your graph. When your graph's generated, now you can connect it again to the front end. And we ended up actually extending that a bit further, and Aiden will share a little bit more about that, to actually generate types and things directly from what we've created here with queries and mutations.
Right. Yes.
We got
right.
And I guess the final thing in this little equation, if you think about the different, aspects of what I've talked about, you've got a front end now where you've got a design system that maps to your Figma. You've got back-end code that basically is going to plug into a database and, generate, all of your different strong types. You've got the GraphQL server that's your back-end for the front end. We kind of got that far, and as we got that far, we were plugged into Aurora Serverless. And what we realized is Aurora Serverless v2 really hates Lambda functions accessing it as a data source. Why? Because it creates tons of connections, right? You got to think every time a Lambda function fires, it's essentially going to create a new connection to a database, which is horrible. And so there's ways to get around it with connection pooling and things like that. But Aurora Serverless v2, on top of not loving all the connections, is incredibly expensive. It's a little bit like driving the rental car, right? And so as we started getting into, we were, I think, 2 weeks out to production at the point we realized Aurora Serverless V2 wasn't going to be a great fit for us, right? So not a place you want to be, having to move databases. And to make life worse, we were using PostgreSQL at the time. So as we started researching what would be a great replacement for that, we ended up landing on this company called PlanetScale. I don't know if any of y'all have heard of PlanetScale, but PlanetScale is amazing. Again, just to give you a little bit of detail on them, they were founded in 2010 at YouTube. Their founder actually left YouTube, started PlanetScale, and essentially what happens is PlanetScale is basically a cloud managed version of Vitess. So Vitess, behind the scenes, creates full-blown clusters for every database that gets created. And effectively, because it's written in Go and uses gRPC, it makes it so that you can connect to the database with almost infinite connections. So it's incredibly fast. You have no need to kind of worry about connection pooling or running out of connections, getting timeouts. It's just essentially infinitely scalable. Outside of that, one of the other things that's incredible about PlanetScale is their entire goal in life is to try to turn database engineering more into like what we do with software engineering. And so there's a branching structure that allows you to actually submit pull requests to change data. So you'll take a mainline database, which is your production database, you'll clone that to development, and then as engineers go to work on features, you'll create feature branches. And for each of those, when a developer's done changing some bit of schema, they'll submit a pull request to the develop branch that somebody then comes behind, does a code review on it, and assuming everything looks well, then you're going to merge that pull request from your feature branch into develop. So it's a completely different way to think about database management, and it's incredibly powerful. So yeah, highly encourage you, if you have not yet, to look at PlanetScale. And from a cost aspect, we're not sponsored by them or anything like that. They're like a fourth or fifth of the cost of Aurora Serverless, like right out of the gate, which is pretty amazing. I'll let you take this one.
Appreciate it. Yeah, so one of the biggest upfront investments that we ended up making into a platform that let developers move fast was that concept of data access and type generation. So along with some of those technologies like Prisma as an ORM, Prisma AppSync, having GraphQL as that layer between our backend and our front end, we wound up with a really interesting ability to generate and share types across the entirety of our applications. So any of you that have worked with JavaScript before, it's amazing, it's versatile, there's a lot you can do with it. And so TypeScript is that next kind of evolution of JavaScript, kind of gives you that structure and security of having shared types, and really allowing to have a better connection from the data to the front end, right? So along with all of these type generation that we can do, along with the sharing from the back end to the front end with the Mono-Repo, we're actually able to generate the React hooks that hook into that data and make that query. So having all of this generated, it almost allows for what feels like, as a front-end developer, instant data access. So whichever one of us was sitting there creating the schema that spins up our database, we instantly, as front-end engineers, have access to all of the use effect React hooks that will query into this, and it gives us loading states, data fetching, error handling, and strong type enforcement. So really, as an engineering group, putting upfront time into generators and things that can allow us to move fast and in a templated way was one of the biggest things that made something like this project possible.
All right, and I'll take this one, but I'll hand it off toward the end to let you give a little bit more insight to what SwiftWise is. So as we were getting ready to contemplate what we were doing, we're not an AI company at Vastly. We're a platform company. We're actually a solution as a service company where we leverage our own platforms. But as we got into this, there was a huge need for generative AI. And it's a pretty nascent space, right? We've all heard of it. We've all played with OpenAI and all the other tooling around it. But again, similar to like the things we've talked about, creating platforms, creating things that are a little bit more enterprise in nature is difficult, right? Why? It's a nascent industry. Finding that people can be challenging. The platforms for even doing things like, logging tokens, logging, the amount of time that people are using things, gating people from doing things that are the wrong thing, integrating with various vector databases, all the orchestration of things to be able to have intelligent conversations and kind of tweak things on the fly, can be challenging. So we had a choice to make, right? We did the whole build by partner, review, and at the end of the day, there just weren't a lot of people out there, doing this kind of at scale. And so I'll let Aiden again, is the founder of Swiftwise AI, so you can talk a little bit about, some of the different types of things that make, productionalizing AI challenging.
Right. Yeah. So it's been a crazy year in regards to AI. Like a really huge hype cycle bubble has created a lot of demand for AI, and along with that demand comes kind of mismanaged expectations, right? So at any level, when you're kind of communicating with a client, there was a lot of conversation that needed to be happening around data quality, data coaching, being able to set that expectation and kind of extract the things that are necessary to create what is a useful like generative AI experience, right? So really consistency, managing hallucinations, creating something that can actually drive a consistent experience with LLMs are kind of all under that real big umbrella of creating some kind of production platform that can deploy this at scale, right? So handling things around scaling, analytics, abuse thresholds, that was kind of the big thing where taking a platform approach in the same way that Vasily had towards AI was the thing that allowed us to do that, right? So at a high level, the tribal knowledge necessary to kind of iterate and create these experiences led us down a really similar path as far as generating and putting upfront investments in things that allow people to move fast.
Cool. And I think the only other thing I'll kind of point out here, you see an example off to the right here. We've unlabeled it, so we're not giving the client away necessarily, but this is actually, a little bit of a preview of the client experience. Essentially, you end up online and, as an end user, you're a homeowner and you're looking for, some sort of experience. And so I think this person said, I want to make my backyard more exciting. And so, there's all kinds of things behind the scenes that you end up, it looks trivial, right? You get a couple paragraphs of text back, it's talking about a couple of advertisers, and you get those rendered off to the right. But in order to make that happen, there's 3 or 4 different types of steps that need to happen to even do that. And then even things as simple as bolding, the text of the contractor, sorting the right ones that should be in the right order. If they come from a vector database, you're actually only getting top K on that. So, challenges that a lot of people don't think about, and that you're, if you're going to, go this route and, play with this sort of stuff, just go in eyes wide open to, it's a little bit more effort than I think most people contemplate. So, outcomes and takeaways. We ran you through a little bit of, where our journey started, what drove us down, needing to actually bifurcate and build another platform for when things didn't really fit the model that we already knew. And, those are tough, conversations to have with your CEO or your, product managers that, hey, we actually, we need to take a step back to be able to move forward, right? So, what were the outcomes? For us, when we think about the project, I guess we'd ask ourselves, were we actually hyper productive? Did we make the deadline? We did. We were actually able to do it. And I think largely a lot of that was the big step back that we took in the beginning, to be really thoughtful about what we needed to do, to start to platformize, to, build things to allow our teams to go faster. If I contemplate if we were happy with the technical architecture, at the end of the day, I think roughly we were. I think we made some assumptions around things like Aurora Serverless and others that ended up being, almost problematic. And, but I think the nature of what we've built allowed us the ability to kind of like plug and play. So again, as you start to kind of think about how could you assemble tooling in your own languages and your own stuff, being able to kind of easily swap out things, to be able to build things with modularization is pretty critical. And then if I think about sacrifices that we, maybe made to achieve the timeline, luckily, I think we were able to dodge that bullet. We were very close, I think, with Aurora Serverless to being like, all right, fine, we're going to have to go server full on this and have some sort of a routing load balancer in front of it to be able to help us with connection pooling. And luckily, we didn't have to make that compromise, which is great. So I think in general, I know we covered a lot of stuff. We went really fast. A lot of it was pretty specific to our use cases. But, for the key takeaways, in my mind, is, make investments in accelerators up front. So when you think about the projects that you're going to take on as a team, what are the types of things that you could do that maybe are slowing you down to speed you up, essentially? Leverage repeatability and reduce cognitive drag. Thinking about the things that you do day in and day out. How do you not just do the same thing over and over again? And then I think the last and maybe most important thing is that adoption of a beginner's mindset. I don't know if you've all heard that term, but that's that idea that, I don't care. I've done this for 25 years. I'm happy to wake up every morning trying to think about things in a different light, to look at different technologies, to leverage something like a planet scale that I've never used before. And it's intimidating. It's intimidating to do it in production and, hope that you've made the right decisions, that you picked the right tools. But it's really paid off. And I think, the last thing, I'll mention is we are hiring. So if y'all know folks, we would love to talk to them. Or if you are a person looking for a new gig, I think we're doing exciting stuff. So yeah, that's really it. So any questions? Like I said, I know we covered a lot, and I know there are a lot of Java folks here as well, and we're quite a pretty heavy TypeScript stack. But yes.
Okay. So it's obvious that you explored lots of paths to get to this particular architecture. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you had in your mind a certain category of projects from the non-functional requirements point of view.
Maybe one more time in the last part.
So I think about performance, for example, for some critical services.
Right.
I know different industries, and I was wondering if you targeted some performance thresholds.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, actually, the person that we worked with Prisma AppSync, helped us do some testing behind the scenes as we got a little bit closer to launch, and it is still working, is engaged with us to help us do some things like that. We really, on this particular project, we didn't have so many from the client. Again, fairly untechnical, fairly whatever. And they're going to do a scaled launch. So at the end of the day, we'll launch to one market and then rinse and repeat and learn. But scalability, knowing that they had, potentially millions of, monthly active users, yeah, definitely a concern. With Planet Scale, the database that I mentioned, they actually, one of the other amazing things that I didn't mention is they'll allow you to, enable a caching layer at the database tier that you can see each query that's ran, its execution plan, the timing, and then cache those queries at that level, and it's quite cheap. So we did have some non-functional requirements, but pretty high level, and it'll be a little bit of a, kind of test and repeat. And again, because we are running things like Node on the front end, there were some things I think that we would have liked to have made server-side rendered that we have not. We're kind of in a mixed mode right now that we're going to have to come back around, and largely because Chakra in its state doesn't support SSR the way it should. So it's kind of it's having us even contemplate things like that, like look at other libraries there. But yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great, cool. Anybody else? All right. Oh, like all the, yeah, that's a great question. So, so all the, what you would consider like a business logic layer kind of a thing, right? Yeah, it's a great question. Usually, what GraphQL will do in this level, you actually are able to create custom resolvers. So you can write a lot of function level code or business logic code at that level as well, because it ends up becoming, again, your backend for a front end. So things that can be CRUD, just straight pass through, right? Queries, mutations, the front end can really think about what do they want, what do they need, and ask for it. And this is a great example with this project. We wanted to support soft deletes. We wanted to, we didn't want to have hard deletes. So I actually, ended up using GQL to, turn off all the hard deletion, and then wrote some custom hooks and business logic that, actually would live just like any other middle tier business logic would. And those become either hooks or custom resolvers. So you still can have that same discipline at that level, but it would end up living at the back end for a front end, level for that. And I think if I had a lot more complexity than that, to be honest, I may not have picked, GraphQL in this particular formula. I may have gone another route, to be honest. Did that answer your question on that? Please, yeah. Yep. No, that's an awesome question too. So again, if I were doing it in this architecture, same blueprint that we had, it would become a custom resolver that would live as a mutation or a query. Behind the scenes, those are a Lambda function. At the end of the day, it's just literally a function as a service Lambda function. And you can actually, when you create your Lambda function, just like any other Lambda function, you can do things like, configure its warm up so that you don't have cold starts and all that sort of stuff. So you still have the ability to have that same scalability and that same sort of an architecture. I think, again, if I thought about this for another client, we've got another large client that's onboarding right now that I probably will not use the same formula on, and primarily because they've got a legacy, legacy CRM that they integrate with that's very industry specific. And so we'll probably have more of a microservice architecture, just a generic microservice architecture, because we'll be writing lots of integrations, and all that sort of stuff. And it may, push us to where, we wouldn't want to have Prisma and resolvers be every integration. It may be a little bit crazy. So, and I think, again, if you think about this in terms of things that you're doing on your own, that's again a little bit my use case of blueprints, right? So you can look at a specific customer blueprint and be like, this customer is like that customer. This is our Prisma App Sync blueprint, right? This is, large scientific whatever customer. There are, whatever blueprint.
And from a development tooling perspective, a lot of the things that we've put time and investment into, especially around the type safety end of things, that would be agnostic of the technologies like Prisma and stuff like that. So we could still leverage a lot of those tools to go fast and build quickly, even with something like a microservices model, right?
For sure. Cool.
Cool. Any others? I saw.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out. We really appreciate it. And yeah, again, if anybody's looking or knows people that are looking, definitely look us up online. Great.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you guys.